anywhere where there's an injustice to fight for justice than the president and founder of the National Action Network. And so it is truly my honor and privilege this morning to bring to you the keeper of the dream, the president and founder of the National Action Network, the Reverend Dr. Al Sharpton.
No justice, no peace. 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 What do we want? Justice. What do we want? Justice. What do we want? Justice. When do we want it? Now. 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 Hug the person next to you, tell him you love him. Certainly, we are happy to be here another King Day. I just flew in from Washington, D.C., where we had our annual breakfast. Every year we have National Action Network's breakfast in Washington, where Martin Luther King III chairs with us. We had Hill Harper MC, and this morning we had former President Bill Clinton speak, as well as the Parkland shooting victim was honored, as well as Kathy Hughes of Urban One. Don't forget tonight at 7 o'clock. They're having Urban One Awards, and it's going to be a big show you need to watch. One of the things that was on our minds this morning around Dr. King's dream and the implementation is there is no public schedule for the President of the United States to do anything today around Dr. King. Donald Trump's public schedule has no activity around Dr. King. Now, last year, there was none, and we attacked him, and he went over to the King Memorial in the afternoon. For the President of the United States to belatedly 1 year, and this year not even as far as we know now, belatedly do it, shows the disregard and disrespect that this president has, but even more, he is trying to play a game of polarization. He started his political rise of birtherism, saying that Barack Obama, the first and only black president thus far, was not one of us. He could prove he was born in Kenya. Never proved it, but what he established is he's not one of us. That gave rise to his career. And he's been polarizing ever since. Right now, they're having a pro-gun march in Virginia. And extremists have already been arrested. We cannot afford, in the name of Dr. King, to play into them pitting us against each other. We can't achieve this dream by having those engaging in nightmares divide us and play this game. And that is why on King Day, we bring our public officials here to talk about policy and talk about how we're going to be together. We stood on this stage. If blacks are shot, if Jews are shot, if Latinos are being put in cages down in the Mexican border, you cannot be for Dr. King and not be for everybody. Civil rights for everybody. If you're only for your own kind, then you're only ruining your own kind. So as we come today, let me say this. I was in Washington and said, President Clinton was there. There is a misnomer that President Trump, when I landed a few minutes ago, he's pointing out that the Senate did not do the trial or their investigation properly or the proceedings properly. First of all, don't forget, he would not be deposed. He would not let anyone that worked for him go before the House. Whatever the Senate doesn't have is because he wouldn't cooperate and give the information. Now, Donna Liebman's here, she's a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, don't even play one on TV. But I do know, if you are accused of something, if you got the ability to say, I'm not testifying, I'm not gonna let anybody that has material information testify, and then call the proceedings bogus, then you have in fact vetoed the court. This is not about whether Donald Trump is guilty or not. This is about whether we have co-equal branches of government. How can he decide the process of the U.S. Congress? But I'm not concerned that he'll get away with it, because I'm from Brooklyn. And we raise tough folk in Brooklyn that don't take no mess. We may lose 1 or 2 rounds, but we gonna win the fight. And we sent a Brooklyn guy down to the U.S. Senate a long time ago, and he's the one in the ring. Let us hear from the senator from Brooklyn, Senator Chuck Schumer.
Folks, are we going to make the fight? Are we going to win the fight? Are we going to send Donald Trump back home to Florida? He's not a New Yorker anymore, I'm proud to say. All right. So I'm going to get into some of this, but I first would like, I don't know if you've done this, but sir, a moment of thoughtful prayer, because as you know, Dr. King, that great man, had someone at his side, in addition to to the pastor and some of the other folks up here. His name is John Lewis. He fought, and now he is fighting cancer. He's our dear friend, my dear friend, so maybe just a moment of thoughtful reflection and prayer for John's speedy recovery. May God give him good health.
Amen, all right there.
Thank you. Now, whoa, there's so much to say. But let me just say this, again, about starting with Dr. King, because that's where it starts. It's the only holiday we have here. Dr. King's holiday is the only holiday on our whole calendar dedicated for one man. We have holidays for a lot of people, presidents for the presidents, Mother's Day for all the moms, Father's Day for the dads, Veterans Day for the veterans, Memorial Day for those who gave their lives, July 4th, the president's birthday, but only one for one man. For so many reasons, but the way I like to think of it is this. Dr. King, with his brilliance, with his eloquence, with his faith, took a giant mirror and he hoisted it on his shoulders. And with his amazing ability to talk to people, he forced all of America to look in that mirror. And what they saw, they didn't like. He forced us to do that. America didn't want to do it. For 200, 300 years, been sweeping it all under the rug. Sweeping it all under the rug, and it's still there. You know, something I tell all of my white friends. White people believe slavery is history. African Americans know we live with slavery today, every day. Thank you. So, he held up that mirror. Now, we cannot just look back. We must look forward. And if he were holding up that mirror today, what would he see? What would America see? What would he force America to see?
Mass incarceration.
Okay, I'm getting there. We'd see a country that elected an African American twice, but is still so far away from excising the vicious evils of bigotry and racism and intolerance. We'd see a country where wealth flows to the very top and people struggle to stay in the middle class or get to the middle class. We'd see a country where people sit around the table every week. Families say, how am I going to pay these damn bills? The medical bills, my car bills, the rent, the mortgage, the college. We'd see a government racked by divisiveness and partisanship, and worst of all, we'd see a man on top presiding over all this dysfunction in the White House. Now, my staff wrote, who is fundamentally dishonest. I'm from Brooklyn. Who is a liar. Who appeals to bigotry, who appeals to divisiveness, who believes in helping the rich and powerful over the everyday people, who stretches the bounds of the presidency to just help himself and his cronies. That's what we'd see. And what would Dr. King importune us to do? To do everything in our power to kick that man out of the White House. And see that everything he stands for is permanently discredited. But Dr. King would do something else with his mirror. Because he was such an amazing man, a diamond, so many facets. And he would show us the fundamental goodness and faith and strength in each of us and in the American people. He would tell us if we fight, we can win. He would remind us that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends in the direction of justice. And he would tell us not to wait, not another day, to take back the country. And usually what I do here is I read his great letter from the Birmingham jail. I don't know if we have time with all the people. He didn't say yes, so I'm not doing it. But it's a great letter, and please read it tonight. Please, two things to read. One, that, and second, I was at Brooklyn Academy of Music, and I saw the woman who wrote 1619 and did the podcast. Everyone who hasn't read it should read it. But anyway, he would tell us not to wait. And let me tell you something. We are not going to wait, okay? When I become majority leader and we send Mitch McConnell back to Kentucky, we're not going to wait to reverse decades of disinvestment in public housing. We're not going to wait to get health care and drugs available to everybody. We're not going to wait till everyone has the right to vote. We're not going to wait till we provide better opportunities for people to get out of jail. We're not going to wait to end the scourge of gun violence that's killing our kids. We won't wait. 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 In Dr. King's name, let's not wait. On to victory.
Give up my hand, Senator Chuck Schumer. We had announced about a year ago that I was moving on with building a museum at the edifice, the developers here. And part of it is going to be, we worked out where we're building a 50,000 square foot museum. In fact, former Chief Judge of the State, Lippman, stand up as my co-chairman of the board on this. Because a lot of what has happened in the Northern movement, in all communities, there's no deposit for it. Sean Bell case, Sean Bell's mother's here, stand up, Ms. Bell. Eric Gardner's case, Howard Beach, all the way back to Garvey, all the way back to where we deal with the questions in the Latino community, LGBTQ. Where do you go and have exhibits that our youngsters know what happened? People don't know that Adam Clayton Powell had the Harlem bus boycott 15 years before the Montgomery boycott. And we're going to have it right here in this building. And I said that to say Schumer must have thought I was leaving now, because now he's leading chance he's trying to become an activist. You go down to Washington, take care of Trump. I'll take care of we can't wait right up here. I have not left yet, Chuck. Let us hear from our fighting senator. My friend and brother is here, former governor of the state of New York, David Paterson. And David Paterson called me one day. I'll never forget, I was on the train coming back from Washington, bad weather. And he said, Reverend, I said, yes. It was a Wednesday. He was sitting in Albany, he was governor. And he said to me, Eric, that he says, who do you have speaking at the Saturday Action Rally? I said, I don't know, I'll check. He says, I want you to have a Congresswoman Gillibrand. I said, who? He said, Congresswoman Gillibrand. I said, well, who is that? He said, you'll know by tomorrow. And the next day he announced that Congresswoman Gillibrand he was appointed to fill the seat of Hillary Clinton. And she would make her first speech right on this stage that Saturday at the House of Justice. So she came in that morning, and the first public speech she made was right here that Saturday morning. I called her Gillibrand. I couldn't even name her right. And she got up and fired the crowd up, and then she said, I'll take questions. I said, hold on. You don't know the House of Justice. You don't want to take questions. We done had everyone from Barack Obama to Hillary here, no questions. She said, no, I'll take, and she stood there a half hour live on the air and took questions. And she's been with us every King Day and every time we've asked. And I want us to hear from the senator from the state of New York, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand.
Well, I want to thank the Reverend for his awesomeness and his incredible leadership. I do want to recognize Governor Paterson. I sit here with so many distinguished men and women, but I would not be here in front of you today but for the governor. And the governor was a man of great, great foresight and vision. He is a man who understood what our state needed. He was a champion for civil rights. He was a champion for social justice. And anything I've ever accomplished in the U.S. Senate is because Governor Paterson gave me that opportunity. Governor Paterson. And I also want to thank Reverend Sharpton, because he is someone who has such a reputation of getting things done and being at the forefront of every social justice movement. And like Senator Schumer, who is an extraordinary partner in the U.S. Senate and one of the greatest U.S. senators New York has ever had, what Senator Schumer does every MLK day is he reads that letter from the Birmingham jail. That's what he does. And he thinks about it, and then he talks about it. And I did the same thing today, because I remembered he said that last year. And so I read the letter this morning, and the person that it reminded most was Reverend Sharpton. Yeah. Absolutely Reverend Sharpton. Because in this letter, Reverend King lays out why he's in Birmingham. And he says, I'm in Birmingham because there's injustice here. An injustice here is an injustice everywhere. That's what he said in that letter. And that's what Reverend Sharpton does. There is not a cause, there is not a fight that he is not there for. He's standing in the forefront, bringing champions with him in every fight of every generation. It's what he's done. The second thing he talks about in this letter is he talks about what he's doing. He says he has to have direct action. Well, what's NAN? Yeah. National Action Network. That's what you do. You have direct action. You are in the community, being advocates, being champions, protesting, speaking out, and fighting back. That's what Dr. King called us to do. He didn't want silence. He didn't want violence. He wanted action. He wanted peaceful action where our voices would be lifted up, where the voices of the voiceless would be heard, where those without a platform would be given one. That's what Dr. King's legacy was about, and that's what Dr. Reverend Sharpton gives us every day. So thank you, Reverend. Dr. King once said, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of convenience and comfort, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy. We have role models, we have lights. Reverend Sharpton is one of them. We lost one of those lights just these past few weeks. Elijah Cummings. He was a great man in the U.S. Congress. He was a bright light for all of us, and we are lesser without him. We also have a bright light in Congressman John Lewis, and it is right for us to send up our prayers for him, for his recovery and his strength. And our job as advocates is to follow the legacy of these leaders among us today who are sitting here behind me, along with the leaders who have come before us. And now is the time where action is necessary. I've never lived in a darker time than now. You watch racism grow, bigotry, and rise under this president. You've seen President Trump find moral equivalencies where there are none. He looked at a riot, and a racist riot, and said that the people who killed a young woman were good people, were nice people there, very fine people there. We've seen under the Trump presidency children being ripped from the arms of their mothers at our border. What does the Statue of Liberty stand for? Send us your tired, send us your poor, send us your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, but not under President Trump. We've seen more anti-Semitic attacks under this president than ever before, all across our city, all across our state. And Dr. King's lesson to all in these dark times is to be the light to drive out the darkness, to be the voice that fights against hate. And so all of us are called to do that. Now, as your senator, I have a job. My job is to be a voice for you, to lift up your voices, to make sure that our black leaders are not fighting these causes alone, to make sure me as a woman of great privilege, of white privilege, is there standing by them on these issues so they do not fight alone. It is not their job and their cause to fight alone. And so my job is to bring forward legislation and ideas. My direct action is legislative action. So I put forward bills to help us achieve economic equality, to make sure we have a living wage for every worker, to make sure when we rebuild America, we rebuild each community, to make sure that when we build infrastructure, black and brown communities aren't left behind. So the people who get to do the jobs are the black and brown people in that community, so they can rebuild it and build their middle class. We have to take on institutional racism in all its forms. Look at the healthcare system. How many black women need to die in America before we take on the issue of maternal mortality in our hospitals in this city? New York City is one of the worst places to give birth as a black woman because you are 12 times more likely to die in childbirth because of institutional racism. So it is my job to push back and to fight to make sure our hospital rooms are safe so that all mothers can be safe and deliver their children. And we have to fight against the scourge in our communities of gun violence. It is something we live with every day. When I meet a mother who lost her 4-year-old son on a park bench in Brooklyn, when I meet the parents of a teenage girl who lost her life to a stray bullet, that demands our action. Every single one of us must keep fighting for safe communities. So in this moment of MLK Day and our interest in lifting up his legacy and his voice, please remember that nothing happens until regular people stand up and demand it. Nothing changes in Washington unless we fight for it. And the greatest place to fight for it is in the ballot box. That is where our voice is as powerful as any millionaire or billionaire. It is with our votes. So come November, who are we going to defeat? Trump. What are we going to do? Flip the Senate. We're going to beat Trump, flip the Senate, and run this country again.
Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Let me say this, we're going down the road for our officials. Last week, President Trump's representatives tried to intimidate the city and how they deal with immigration and deal with people. They particularly get beside themselves when it's dealing with disproportionate people of color. I was proud that the mayor of the city stood up and said that this is one of the safest cities in the country, and you're not going to bully us and push us around. He is also one that stood up with us around stop and frisk and other issues. So I know that there are some here talking about being mayor, but we have not got finished with who is the mayor. You know, I preached in Atlanta yesterday. James Brown's family came to see me. He used to sing, "I want to be the mayor so I could change some things around here." Well, he did, our mayor of the city of New York, who sent a fire shot across the barrel's back at ICE and has stood with us in National Action Network. Let us welcome Mayor Bill de Blasio.
Happy King Day, everybody. I'm really honored and moved to be with you. Rev, you are packing them in today. We have a big crowd here for King Day. Look around you, everybody. Everybody here cares. Everybody here is an activist, a fighter for justice. Give your neighbor a round of applause. National Action Network, carrying on Dr. King's legacy, putting it into action every day. Thank you. Reverend Sharpton, thank you. Because I know you, as a young man, took Dr. King's legacy, it coursed through you, you believed it, you believed we had to live it, and you have lived it out every day ever since. Let's thank Reverend Sharpton. Now, Al Sharpton has a habit of saying the blunt truth from time to time. So let me just say something about ICE and this controversy. ICE is now a political arm of Donald Trump's campaign committee. That's what's going on here. ICE is acting to whip up racist fervor. That's what's going on here. This is not about protecting our borders, brothers and sisters. This is not about making us safer. This is the safest big city in America. We are proud of that fact. But that's because we all work together. We believe that all of us are New Yorkers.
That's right.
It doesn't matter where you come from. We do not ask for your papers to know if you're a New Yorker. If you live down the block, you're a New Yorker. If you're on the subway with us, you're a New Yorker. If you work where we work, you're a New Yorker. So let's stop this madness. This is all about trying to create deeper division in this country so Donald Trump can win an election. We're not going to allow this country or our city to be divided. Dr. King believed that we could all find a way together if we overcame the divisions of the past. So, I'm telling you what you see coming out of Washington right now. It's a trick we have seen for years and years and years, but we're wise to it, aren't we? We won't fall for it. This day is a day to really understand what Dr. King stood for. I want to talk about another topic that should be urgently talked about, but it isn't enough of the time. And I want to take you back to the fact that Dr. King, after already saying things that need to be said on the question of race in America, on the question of civil rights, after already having created such a movement for justice, such a movement of conscience that he had many, many enemies, he then decided there was something else that had to be talked about. He decided the war in Vietnam had to be called out for what it was. Now, if you look at the history, many, many people around him advised him not to do it. Many around him told him that if he talked about the blunt truth of what was happening in Vietnam, that he'd lose a lot of support, that a lot of people would walk away from him. But Dr. King showed us what it meant to really speak about what was happening to everyday people, what was happening to their lives. He knew too many young black men were being sent to die in Vietnam.
That's right.
He knew that we could not turn around our country if we were caught up in an endless war in Vietnam. Dr. King in 1967 went very, very near to here at Riverside Church. He gave a speech called Beyond Vietnam, and it was radical. It was revolutionary. He said we would never achieve justice if we were in the midst of war. He said you could not have justice while a war was going on. Dr. King was right. And now we find ourselves in the new reality, and it's talked about sometimes, but then somehow it's forgotten. We have been in a series of forever wars.
That's right.
Afghanistan, Iraq, and now there are some in Washington trying to get us into an even greater war with Iran. The dangers are unestimable. Right now we know over these last 20 years we've lost over 6,000 American men and women in the wars in the Middle East. And tens of thousands came back wounded. Their lives will never be the same. Their families will never be the same. A recent study came out that told us something that should shock us all. In these last 20 years of endless wars, our nation has spent $6.4 trillion on war. $6.4 trillion. That money, a small fraction would have given us as a nation pre-K for every child in America. Every child could have had that. A small fraction could have allowed us, not only in America, but all over the world, to end these horrible greenhouse gas emissions that are threatening our future and spurring global warming. Small fraction. If you took all that money, you could have rebuilt every road, every bridge, every subway, every park, and every school in the United States of America. That's what that money could have paid for. Instead, it went to war and death. Dr. King said in 1968 at the National Cathedral, "War plays havoc with our domestic destinies. Something must be done and done quickly." And he said further that no one who has any concern for the integrity and life of America today can ignore the present war. Brothers and sisters, I'm here to say this to you because we're at a moment of decision, but it doesn't feel that way. Have you noticed with Iran that one day it feels like war is just minutes away and then the next day you don't hear a thing about it? Do you realize that the attack on General Soleimani was the first time since World War II that the United States killed a foreign military leader? Wow. Something is happening that is bigger than is being acknowledged. And a war with Iran would mean the endless wars would go on literally for a generation. And that would foreclose any possibility of the justice we seek here in our own nation. I'm going to conclude with this. Dr. King, we looked at him with such passion, such belief, such admiration. And we feel a warmth for Dr. King and his memory. But Dr. King could also be a stern voice. He could be a voice that warned us. And in that Beyond Vietnam speech, he said a simple, simple thing. He said, a time comes when silence is betrayal. We cannot be silent on the growing march to war in Iran. We cannot be silent to the fact that there are some in Washington who would like to see us in these endless wars. There are some who believe the endless wars will stop the kind of changes that we need. And we can't be silent about that. I will conclude with a hopeful point, and I believe it in my heart. Because when I've stood here before, I have been in the company of people who believe that silence is unacceptable.
That's right.
And I know the people gathered here today believe silence is unacceptable. We all stood up a few years ago and we said we would not be silent on stop and frisk, and now stop and frisk is gone. We stood up after the election of Donald Trump and on behalf of the rights of women held the biggest protest in the history of the United States of America. We are standing up right now against the voices of hate that are raging around us, trying to reshape our society. One good thing about New Yorkers, we are rarely silent. But we got to be even louder now. So brothers and sisters, mark King Day with a full recognition of what he called us to. He called us to use our voices. He called us to march in the streets. He called us to never look away from the truth. And the truth is, if they take us into another war, we will never be able to have the nation we deserve. So let's stop it now. Thank you. God bless you all.
Let us now hear from a man that has fought in the trenches and is now the Speaker of the New York State Assembly. There was a time when I was growing up, we would have the big three in the room and try to get a black agenda passed through the crack in the door. Now, when the three meet in the room, 2/3 of the three is black. And one of those strong pillars that has that three-legged stand on the budget and on many of the state progressive decisions made. That's why I don't do a whole lot of singing and moaning and clapping on King Day. This is about hearing on policy. Dr. King dealt with policy and law and used marching and protest to dramatize to get results. You just marching and venting, you are just bringing folks through exercise class. We want stuff done. Now nobody does more marching and rallying than us, but what a direct result is what we want. And this is one of those on the inside that understands that we set the climate on the outside so that he could operate on the inside in our interests. When I first started 8 years ago, my show on MSNBC, a guy said to me, Reverend Al, I saw you down last week in Sanford, Florida for Trayvon. He said, I thought that you are not going to keep marching since you now got a show on NBC. I said, you don't understand something. There are two Al's that work in 30 Rockefeller Plaza. Both of them black. One of them name is Al Roker. The other is Al Sharpton. Al Roker gives you the temperature. Al Sharpton changes the temperature. State Assembly Speaker Carl Hastings.
Let me first give a big thank you to Reverend Sharpton. You know, when we reflect on King Day, the overriding message is always a commitment to social justice. And for decades, Reverend Sharpton was at the forefront. Even when he was standing out there by himself, people called him names, people called him everything, but he always stood up for what was right. And I'm gonna be brief, but I just want to tell you a little story and tell you why I'm so committed to this social justice agenda that we've been trying to do in New York. When I was around 10 years old, my family, we went on a trip, we were going to Disney World, and we stopped somewhere in Georgia. I can't remember, I was only about 9 or 10 years old. And we stopped by a park, and my father said, come here, I want to show you something. And my father wasn't really a man of a lot of words, a lot of emotion. But on the wall, it was where a water fountain was, and you could still see it was kind of vague and kind of worn away, but you could see where it had the different water fountains, where it had white and it had colored only. And my father just pointed to that and he says, I want you to remember this. At 9 or 10 years old, I was like, okay, Dad, you know, let's get to Disney World. But here it is now, almost 40 years later, I remember that time for my father to say that. And here we are 40 years later. We're in a better place, but we still got a lot of work to do. And I want to thank the Reverend for thanking me for the issues of social justice, because that is really where this country still has a lot of work to do. Because as long as we still have homelessness, we still got a lot of work to do on social justice. As long as we still have mass incarceration, we still got a lot of work to do in social justice. People are still struggling to find a place to live and lay, and the income inequality is still so vast in this country. We still got a lot of work to do in social justice. And I'm finding that, as everyone said, one of the best things that, I mean, there's a lot of things that Dr. King said, but where you stand in times of controversy, in the toughest times, where do you stand? That is the true measure of your character. So that's why I'm okay standing up and trying to make sure that people understand why we did criminal justice reform. To talk about changing a 300-year system of having a racist and classist criminal justice system. And that's why I'm standing up so strong on that. Yes, and I know Latrice Walker, who's the sponsor, and other assembly members are up here. This is why it is so important. Because incarceration leads to people losing their jobs, leads to homelessness, leads to family divides. That's why it's so important. God bless you and happy King Day.
Congressman from Harlem and Washington Heights, Congressman Adriano Espia.
Thank you, Rev. Thank you. He says it right, he says it strong, he says it in English and sometimes even in Spanish. When he doesn't remember, I teach him a little Inglés sin barreras. English without barriers. So, this is an important day for us. It's really every day. Every day is King Day. Because injustices wake up with us every morning. So it's not just one day, it's every single day. And so we think about King, and we all always think about this metaphor of the lion and the lamb, right? And yes, maybe he was a lamb when he prayed to God, and he prayed for all of us, and he was in the pulpit giving the message of the Lord to many of us across the country. But he was a lion out there when he was marching for civil rights. He was a lion out there when he was crossing those bridges and facing racist police officers and dogs and fire hoses. I don't see how you can face that without being a lion. So yes, he was a lamb, and we all look at his spiritual guidance and the word that he preached across the country for direction. But his actions made him a lion as well. And so when we think about today's celebration, we think about several of the issues that we face every day when we wake up in the morning. Every day is King Day. And one of them, I think, could not be any tougher for the average New Yorkers. Sometimes, we wake up, we in politics think that we should save the world, the planet, and that this is philosophy 101. When in fact, people they just want practical things resolved for them on a daily basis to make their life just a bit smoother. And affordability, right? Affordability. That word, English is my second language, so I have to learn this right. Affordability is ripping our city apart. And so when you wake up out of Harlem in the morning, affordability hits you right in the face. You know it, you see it. You feel it in your pocket. When you go to East Harlem, which launched the Latino experience in New York City, and you walk out every morning after you brush your teeth, you say, affordability hits you right in your pocket, hits you right on your face. If you're an immigrant in Washington Heights, and maybe you're working 2 jobs, but you gotta pay $2,000 rent, and maybe rent a room, and be afraid that the landlord's gonna find out and kick you out because you violated a term of a clause of the lease. Affordability hits you right in the center of your heart every day. And thank God we got a $15 an hour minimum wage now. It should be higher, I think. So I think King would have looked at this and would have taken this on. And affordability and gentrification is ripping our neighborhood apart. And I walk around, and I'm from Washington Heights. Well, now I represent Harlem, so I make it my business to walk around Harlem as much as I can. Sometimes I want to walk with the Reverend hand in hand, too. That doesn't hurt. And let me tell you, Harlem is not the Harlem that we may want it to be. We're not against people coming in, but we're about keeping the people that are there, that with blood, sweat, and tears made it Harlem. And so when you walk in Washington Heights, a working class immigrant neighborhood, one that I grew up in, and you see the stress of high rent. Now you got Starbucks, and bike lanes, and sushi. And where's my rice and beans? Somebody told me on my way out of the men's room that I'm eating a little bit too much rice and beans. You know what I mean, right? So, affordability is ripping our city apart. It's segregating it. Senator Jackson just said at another church that our school system is one of the most segregated in the city, if not the country. Of course that it is. Because our neighborhoods are segregated. Because black and brown people are poor, and that's why they send their children to those schools. So yes, segregation is still alive and well, and on every day, which is King Day, we should take that on. Let's fight for affordable housing. 100% affordable. We don't want this 80-20 stuff. We don't know what that is. That's like playing the numbers back in the day. We don't want that. I know that I used to buy a big rag to figure out who won, but it's not about that. We want 100% affordable, Reverend. 100% affordable. Let's keep it affordable. Let's save our city. Let's keep the faith.
I always wanted a congressman that knew what Big Red was. In 2005, When I ran for president, we said, what are we going to do about New Hampshire? And there was a young man who went to New Hampshire and campaigned for me to be president. He either was visionary or crazy. He is now the Speaker of the New York City Council, and he still has not resolved the question. When he keeps coming up with all of these progressive recommendations, either he's visionary or he's crazy. But he is one that has been with us a long time. May we hear from the Speaker of the New York City Council, Speaker Corey Johnson.
There's nothing wrong with being a little bit crazy. That makes you a New Yorker. I wanted to thank Reverend Sharpton for having this every year, and I was going to say, I didn't know he was going to say that introducing me, but it was 16 years ago this month, this January, that I drove him around snowy New Hampshire campaigning for president, and I have been proud to stand with Reverend Sharpton since that day and every day on issues that matter for social and economic justice. You know, Dr. King was a man who dedicated his life to, as he said, quote, opening the doors of opportunity to all of God's children. And I am someone who grew up in a little tiny town close to New Hampshire, 3,000 people, and in that town there were 12 units of public housing. And my family lived in one of those 12 units of public housing from when I was 9 years old until I graduated high school at 18 years old. My mother was my lunch lady at school growing up and cleaned houses on the weekends to provide for me and my sister. My father was a Pepsi truck driver who struggled with alcoholism. And I love New York City. It's an honor for me to be able to serve the city that I came to at 19 years old with knowing one person, having 2 bags, that I was able to come to a city and some of those doors were open for me. But we know that those doors that Dr. King talked about, it's becoming harder and harder for a 19-year-old to move to New York City now and have those doors open for them. And so it is our job to not just talk about the issues that we face in Washington, but as Congressman Espaillat said, the issues that we face here at home. And the affordability crisis that the congressman just mentioned is real. The rent is still too damn high. And when we talk about affordable housing, the question is, affordable to who? That's the question. And so it's easy to stand up here and just rail about those things, but you need, as the Reverend said on this King Day, policies and ideas to effectuate that change. We need to build affordable housing for homeless people who are struggling right now. We need to make sure that our public housing does not crumble before our very eyes. We need to make those difficult decisions and choices on not having the most segregated school system in the United States of America. Those are the things that we need to do, and we need to build affordable grocery stores in neighborhoods across New York City, because 1 million New Yorkers, 1 million are going food insecure every single day. So those are the issues that our city faces. And Dr. King also said nothing will be done until people of goodwill put their bodies and their souls in motion. This is a room of people putting their bodies and souls into motion on behalf of the city that we love so much. And I will end with this. We have a lot of problems, as you've heard, but I still believe, even with those problems, that New York City is the greatest city in the world. We are the greatest city in the world. We are the city that gave the world J-Lo and Al Sharpton. We are the city that is the home of the lemon ice king of Corona. We are the city that not that far from here, the Statue of Liberty has stood in New York Harbor for generations, holding a torch which has been a beacon to immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees. Immigrants are welcome here in New York City. We are the city that out of 8.6 million people who live here, 37% of New Yorkers were not born in the United States of America, but came here with dreams and aspirations for themselves and for their families. We're the city that 50 years ago last June, some brave activists rose up on Christopher Street and decided to fight back, which lit a match towards worldwide equality. We are the greatest city in the world, and as an openly gay man, as the only openly HIV positive elected official in the state of New York, as someone who last July 13th celebrated 11 years clean and sober from drugs and alcohol, my biggest accomplishment in life, it is important for us to talk about the struggles and challenges that our city faces and the struggles and challenges that we faced, and how we can turn that into policies and dreams for a better city. New York City is the greatest city in the world, but greatness is not guaranteed. Justice is not guaranteed. Progress is not guaranteed. It takes action. It takes ideas. It takes inspiring people. That is what Reverend Sharpton does every single day. That is what the House of Justice has been about for decades. And that is the struggle that we are reminded about today on King Day, but one that we must hold with us every day moving forward, not just in defeating the racist in chief in the White House, but also looking in the mirror and figuring out in our great city, what can we do to have a more perfect, equitable, and just city? And I look forward to doing that work with all of you. Thank you very much.
Speaker Corey Johnson, one of the people that came out of a movement for social justice. He's been a member of NAN. He's marched with us, worked with us from his young years, and never stopped, and is still in the streets as he is the second highest elected officer in the city of New York, dealing with those in the streets. We are proud of him and we work with him, and on King Day salute him. Let us hear from the public advocate of the city of New York, Jumaane Williams.
Peace and blessings. What's up, House of Justice? How you doing? Very excited to be here. I think he just walked out, but I want to make sure I shout out Speaker Hasty and Latrice Walker for the work they're doing around bail reform. They're the primary reason they haven't walked back yet. So I want to make sure we shout them out. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to reflect today on a hero of mine, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. When I was young, my heroes were Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Spider-Man, X-Men, and Batman. They were all heroes. I admired the way he stood up for people non-violently, which takes even more strength in my opinion. Realizing where he was, recognizing his situation and how to use that in his advantage. Sustaining that strength, taking strength from God and the Most High, lessons from the Bible. It is incredibly disturbing, however, sometimes when I see people sanitizing Dr. King and misrepresenting who he was. MLK was an extraordinary leader who opposed violence, but that does not mean he was consigned to be docile. He was a disruptor, he was an agitator, he was a revolutionary, he was a radical. Those who don't believe in the cause sometimes will attack the tactics. There are people who want change, but they don't want to see the work done. They celebrate the work of others. They may recall the words, but they do not understand the meaning or the context. They remember the dream, but not the fight to make the dream a reality. Not the fact that many of those dreams were born inside of a jail cell. And when I hear rabble-rousel, troublemaking, and all those things, you have to think of this man right here, Reverend Al Sharpton. And you know you're doing a good job when the people who don't like you and like you say the same thing. If something happened right now, somebody don't like him, they say, where's Reverend Al Sharpton? But somebody who knows who he is and want him, if something happened right now, say, where the hell is Al Sharpton? We need him right now to make this thing happen. People use this misinterpretation to attack modern acts of protest and dissent. Dr. King himself never condemned protest and dissent in the streets in the young people. And don't let them fool you. We got to choose between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. They were both revolutionaries. And by the way, they were both killed violently. They want you to believe that it is the way you protest. But the fact is, it is how you protest that disrupts the system. I mean, the fact that you protest at all is what disrupts the system. Every generation looks back on the previous generation with a different set of eyes. They believe that if they were there, they'd have the fortitude to stand up with the movement, that they'd have the fortitude to stand up with Dr. King. Well, right now we are in a movement. Right now that legacy is here to keep that moral fortitude. And the question will be asked a few years from now, where were you? Where were you when all this was going on? Where were you when there were children and babies being molested in cages? Where were you when black trans women were being killed with impunity? Where were you when tens of thousands of black girls are disappearing and nobody is saying anything at all? Where were you when there was a man in the White House and all he was missing is a hood? Where were you when we know it wasn't just that one man in the White House, but an entire party that is lifting up? Where were you when all of these things were happening? So if you talk about Dr. King, the time is right now to cement your legacy. Because I'm telling you, back then, there were grandmothers and people who had no college degrees that we don't remember their name, but because they knew what was going on, they hit them streets and they hit them hard. And I want everybody here to be remembered in that legacy. When you say, what did you do? You can say every damn thing I could to make sure we came to the next generation. Now, recent events in the last week saw anti-Semitism on the rise and bigotries have been on the rise in our city and our state. It was a reminder that human condition is ever a work in progress. It is in these moments like these, that our society must commit to work even harder to find common ground and provide a space for healing and honest conversation. In the Daily News today, I recommend you take a read. I talked about James Chaney, Michael Schwerner, and Andrew Boardman. 3 civil rights workers, 1 black and 2 Jewish men brutally murdered by members of the Ku Klux Klan in Philadelphia, Mississippi on the night of June 21st, 1965. This points to the historical reality that the communities have worked together to address societal ills. That means we must raise our collective voices together, not only to condemn instances of anti-Semitism, but racism and all bigotry, not one without the other, and create meaningful platforms to have dialogue to address the underlying causes of these incidences. We will not allow people to talk about anti-Semitism against bail reform and the black and brown bodies that will be saved. We have the ability to talk about both and push them forward. We reject that policies of division. And I have to say this, and I sometimes lose some people, but it ain't just Trump and it ain't just Republicans. This city is the most segregated school system in the entire nation. There's 70,000 people that are going to be homeless. There are luxury apartments sitting vacant while over 4,000 people will sleep on the streets tonight. There are Democratic governors and mayors across this city that have helped us get here. And I want the Democrats to be held accountable as too. This week, as we celebrate the memory and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, I ask my fellow New Yorkers to look beyond slogans, look beyond euphemism, stand for the revolutionary king, stand for the radical king. As he said, let us rise up tonight with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. Let us move on these powerful days, these days of challenge to make America what it ought to be. We have an opportunity to make America a better nation. Let's get to it. If you're going to speak his name, be about it. Some people got to keep his name out their mouth. Peace.